And yes, we do by accident dress the same. Hey guys, Dr Syl here, junior doctor from Australia on the psychiatry training program. And excitingly, I have my friend and colleague, Dr Russell Barnes, joining me for today's psychiatric analysis. So thank you so much for joining today, Russell.
No worries, Dr. Syl. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to be on.
Yeah, thanks. This was actually a video recommended by you. The video is titled Fentanyl Addict Interview Jake. It's from the Soft White Underbelly YouTube channel, a fascinating channel. Definitely go check out their stuff, and we'll put the link to the video down below. But it's gotten millions of views. It's clearly touching on some really important issues, such as the opioid crisis in the States. And so let's get into it.
Let's do it.
All right, Jake. Where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Huntington Beach, California.
Orange County?
Orange County, yeah.
And tell me about your family. You had mom and dad?
Yeah, I had mom and dad, one sister. They got divorced when I was about 12, but it was always kind of like they were divorced but living in the same house. So it was kind of like a relief almost when they got divorced.
How would you describe your childhood in general?
Dysfunctional. I had anger issues as a kid, I feel like, and I have ADHD, depression, bipolar disorder, a few different things. So growing up wasn't easy, and especially at school, it wasn't easy because I'd always be getting in trouble for trying to talk too much or bullied for trying to talk too much.
Is that the ADHD?
Yeah. And then when I got put on meds, it made me just focus, but like apparently like it made me a zombie. I don't remember much, but they didn't like me on meds much either because that was bad. So it took me off that. Then I got put on the painkillers for having my leg broken. So
You broke your leg skateboarding?
broke my leg motocross racing.
Motocross.
Yeah, and then after the painkillers, it's funny, like I didn't even start doing them automatically. Like I saw it on Dr. House that he popped them. I was like, oh, I have that in my cabinet. And I just like popped two. First time I got kind of sick, I was like, I don't know if I like this, but at the same time, it was like, you know, a release. Like I stopped feeling so much pain for a little bit, I guess. And that's why I kept continuing to use. Went through that supply pretty quick, 100 bottle. Started just trying to buy from people at school, but that stopped working because people were out. So I just kept...
They're selling those at your high school?
Oh yeah, every drug you could want.
Wow.
I resorted to stealing opiates for a long time, actually. I stole a whole pint from one of my friends. So that's sad.
All right, so let's pause it there and pardon the introduction by Albie, my dog, who came to check out what we were watching. He didn't seem too interested, so he left. But yeah, already Jake is talking about some concerning behaviors, some addictive tendencies, and already going to, like pretty rapidly going to theft in order to meet what sounds like a pretty rapidly formed addiction. Yeah, what are your thoughts so far?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting things just in that first little part there. I suppose he describes what sounds like quite a difficult childhood. So there's obviously quite a bit of trauma there. You know, he had his parents' divorce that was obviously rough. And I mean, he characterized his childhood as really quite difficult. And you get the sense that he was perhaps understating a little bit, right? And oftentimes, you know, it's that traumatic early developmental period then leads to those difficulties that he's later on kind of self-medicating, I guess, and it's, I suppose, often no coincidence that it's substances or drugs like fentanyl, right, which is a really powerful opioid and is a depressant, you know, because it helps to dampen the pain down, which is how we described it.
Yeah, I think it's probably useful just to give a quick rundown on how opioids work. These are literally opioid receptor agonists, and they are depressant in the brain, but that doesn't mean they make you feel depressed. They are actually euphoric, and fentanyl is 70 to 100 times more potent than morphine. So it is very easy to get addicted to and overdose on. But the depressant effects in the brainstem can make a respiratory depression, and that's how a lot of people can die. And that's what you would see in the emergency department, and we'd jab people with naloxone and stuff. So it's really dangerous medicine. It's really for short-term use in surgical pain or cancer pain, I guess. So it sounded like maybe it was a fair initial indication, which often it is, but then it gets out of hand when people get hooked. And it's just so scary how a vulnerable person with a tricky childhood and issues in their mental health can form an addiction. I guess the other thing is, how does early childhood experience play into ADHD? Because if you have been raised in an environment of high expressed emotions and with two divorced parents in the same house,
yelling and screaming.
Yeah, he hasn't kind of gone into it, but you can imagine. That makes it very hard for a kid to develop the prefrontal cortex to build strong focus skills. So anyway, let's kick on.
And I suppose the other thing is also that often with ADHD, and particularly when it's not recognized, it prevents kids from kind of paying attention at school. Therefore, school is frustrating. They don't do well, and they kind of just naturally drift into fit in with those other kind of other
There goes
kids.
the self-esteem and the poor decisions that follow.
This is a real, only a few people know about this one. I stole Oxy from my aunt with cancer. So, some shows you where drugs can take you. I started doing a little bit better when I got a girlfriend around 16. For about a year or so, I was working, just smoking weed. That was it. But things started getting toxic with her. Like, if I would be at work, she would just be trying to start fights with me while I was at work for, like, whatever reason. She had, what was it? It's one of the worst mental disorders. I forgot what it's called. It's not borderline personality. Yeah, borderline personality disorder. She has that. And if you don't know, that's very hard to live with. She lived at my house. So fighting was constant. That's how I lost the tip of my finger.
How'd that happen?
Got slammed in a door when she was screaming at me, and I kept trying to run away, like, to close this door, and she just kept slamming it open, and I tried to push it, and she slammed it, and it was on the ground, and I was just like, holy fuck, like, my fingertips just on the ground. Like, it was kind of a surreal moment, and that was one of the first moments where I realized, like, this relationship is so not okay. And I went to the hospital. My dad took me. She didn't come with me. So, yeah. And it's funny because as soon as I saw
Any reflections on weed use in teenagers and BPD relationships? There's probably a lot to unpack there.
There was quite a bit there, wasn't there? Look, I know lots of people smoke weed, and it's kind of been quite normalised in our society, and in Canberra in particular, it's decriminalised. But I think there's a lot of evidence that suggests that it's particularly bad for young people, and it really impacts on their development. But it also really can unmask any kind of psychosis that might be present. And if you've got any of family history of that kind of stuff, it's...
Yeah, my view on weed is that it's an okay drug for some people after the age of 25, and that they've sorted their shit out.
Frontal lobes have finished developing.
Yeah, and that the most important thing in those first 25 years of life is really establishing a direction. And weed is a direction killer. It makes you so at ease with not achieving your goals, your personal goals. And it gives you a false sense of security. And it's also the day after there is, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal gland axis dysfunction. There is high levels of cortisol the next day. So there is it helps with anxiety in the short term, but on the next day, there's an increase in cortisol. you're going to feel more stressed, so you're going to smoke more weed, and you're going to get into this bad psychological dependence on it, and it doesn't make things better. And I guess I've done a couple of videos on BPD, you guys can check out, but yeah, BPD can be a very tricky thing to, if you're in a relationship with someone with borderline personality. But if people engage in therapy, there are good outcomes. It's got very good outcomes if you do long-term therapy with a good psychologist.
Yes, it's definitely very treatable. But it was interesting also how he said, what was it? It was one of the worst mental disorders, right? I found that interesting.
Yeah, that's right.
Given all this guy's got a fair bit going on, but he's still characterized it as one of the worst mental disorders. I find that interesting.
The Johnny Depp trial that he lost his fingertip, the same one on the same hand. And I was like, that's so crazy. What a coincidence, but not a good coincidence. And she actually had the same mental disorder that Amber Heard had, so yeah.
Interesting. So eventually this led to street drugs?
Oh, yeah. As things got worse, well, one time I got a bunch of Molly, and all of my friends, we were rolling at the skate park, and the cops come, they search everyone. Luckily, it was in my backpack, but everyone was on drugs, and I didn't know how they didn't notice, but I got to go home, and I just raced home, and then that night I went home and did all the Molly, and if you don't know what happens after that, it's the worst come down in your life. You feel like you just want to kill yourself, no serotonin in your brain at all. And after that, instead of just picking up weed like I normally would, I just got Coke. And then I binged on Coke for a week. And then after that come down, adding on to the other come down was I couldn't handle it. I went and got some Xanax bars from the skate park, came home, popped 3. The next morning, if you don't know what bar rage is, I got into bar rage. I woke up and I was just really mad, and I started just fucking shit up, and cops came and I got arrested for 6 months. So that was the longest time I've ever been sober, was that stint.
Being in jail.
Yeah. I know you like your pharmacology, and I think that was a really interesting set of binges that Jake suffered through, really. And started off with Molly, MDMA, ecstasy overdose, which had big dopaminergic, serotonergic spikes, and then you deplete it all.
That's right.
And so
nothing left.
Nothing left. So what does he do next? He went to replete it. He went to fill it up again, but the stores are running out. So he takes the cocaine, which is very dopaminergic, and then that really would dry out the neurons of all the dopamine, and then to kind of to kind of have a safe what would you call it, to kind of treat the horrible hangover. Come down aid. That's it's very unsafe come down aid Xanax, because it's very short acting. It's short half-life and very addictive itself. Yeah. And so he had, and it comes in bars, weirdly, in the States. So he had some Xanax as well, which is a benzodiazepine, which is GABAergic and a depressant to settle his nerves. But then when that wore off, what's he left with? He's left with just pure anger.
I was imagining what he was describing as more of a paradoxical reaction, which you sometimes get with those high potency benzos. There was this old school one called Rohypnol that was just notorious for doing that as well, and people would become quite disinhibited, but completely amnestic, which is to say that they have no memory of what could be several days, because this was a long half-life potent benzo. And people would describe kind of going on rampages around the place and waking up days later with different clothes and no wallet, no keys, no idea about how they got there, strange people around and things like that.
Jeez, yeah, so paradoxical reaction to the benzos, absolutely. That's a good differential.
Juvenile hall, actually. I turned 18 in juvenile hall.
Oh, I see.
That was a weird birthday. But honestly, I wouldn't change it. I would still have gone, because I feel like it made me a better person. It made me reevaluate some things. even though I came out and I started to use again, while I was in, I was like working out instead of using drugs to, you know, fight those demons or whatever. And
Sorry, I've got to always pause when people say that, just to reinforce the importance of sublimation as a healthy defense mechanism with people who have addiction and personality vulnerabilities. What he's saying is so good. There are other ways to manage that psychic pain, those stresses, and a great way for young men to sublimate, especially alexithymic, young men who can't describe their emotions, who don't know what they're feeling. They just get angry and they break things. Use that anger, use that energy, put it into exercise, punch a punching bag, sublimate it into a positive, acceptable energy.
Yeah, use your power for good.
That's it.
And not evil.
that was helping a lot. I came out a lot bigger than I went in because I was binging on coke and stuff. So I came in all skinny. Came out like pretty good, healthy.
Not much else to do in there.
Yeah, exactly. So
Workout.
So yeah, and after I got out, I wanted to be sober, but like everyone that I knew was smoking weed, and they were like, "Oh, you can just smoke weed. Like you can just smoke weed." And like, I kept telling them, "I don't think I can. I really don't think I can just smoke weed." But eventually, I gave in, started smoking weed again. And that same day that I started smoking weed, it went all crazy. I started drinking alcohol. I popped some Klonopin. I got in a car crash at the beach. I backed into some guy's car, and it was like smashed in. I was so scared I hurt him or something, and I got out and like I was just like very intoxicated, but I dealt with it somehow still. And like I decided to drive home, and like I felt so bad. I was like, what the fuck can I do other than just give him my information? Like, and that was like, I would say it's a wake up call, but it didn't wake me up. I kept doing it, so it kept getting worse from that point. A little bit after that, my grandpa passed away, and I had to watch him pass away. We went to Texas, and for 2 weeks, watched him fade away in front of us, and that was really weird. And to try to deal with that, I popped I tried to buy some Xanax to bring so I could deal with it better when I was out there. And I ended up taking all the Xanax that night, all 10, and I drove to my friend's house. And I don't remember driving there, or all I remember is stumbling in the door and no one saying a word to me. Everyone was just staring at me like, what the fuck? What the fuck's going on? Like, and I was just pissed off that no one said anything to me. So I just got up and left again. Somehow I drove home. Didn't get in a car crash. I don't know how many times I've driven home, and I don't remember a thing about it, and I just somehow woke up in my bed and my car's outside. Sometimes it was parked pretty fucked up, but I didn't kill anyone, luckily. So after my grandpa died, I started using heroin. That was the first time I used heroin. I went to his funeral on heroin. I don't know how much my family knew about it, but my ex said that they probably all knew. It was pretty obvious, she said. And I came back. I started to use fentanyl for the first time. I was at 17, and I only used it for about a week. And I was in the living room talking, and I guess I nodded out in front of my whole family, just like. And then I woke up with like my dad shouting at me like, "What the fuck are you on? Like, what the fuck?" And then like he didn't let it go. He was like, "If you don't stop this, you're out of the house. You're out of the house if you don't stop it." And I stopped. I went through the withdrawals. I used kratom. My ex helped me through it the whole time. And then the sad thing is I didn't stay sober. I just hopped onto Adderall because I started going to college as a way to like, my dad was like, either get a job or go to school. You got to do something now that you're off heroin again. You can't just be sitting in my house. So I started to go to college again. Originally, I was just taking Adderall because I have ADHD and I literally cannot focus. I tried to go a few days and I could not focus at all. And it was sad. I really wanted to be able to focus, but like it's just not, I don't have the ability to. And so I tried to start taking Adderall and I was able to focus. I was able to retain the information. It was working. Like I was so happy at this first time. Like I didn't really remember taking it as a kid much, but taking it, starting again, it was like, I can actually like, I can sit and do things I'm motivated. I haven't been able to do any of this my whole life. So I loved it. And the Adderall dealer moved away, and everyone always said, like, it's so close to meth. Like, meth and Adderall are the same thing. They're not the same thing. But I started doing meth, and it got a lot worse. It went from me taking Adderall to make clothes and do homework and stuff for college to me doing meth and playing video games all day long, or me doing meth and doing shit I shouldn't be doing behind my girlfriend's back. Not cheating, but stuff I shouldn't be doing. That was one of the main things in our relationship that fucked it up, was me using meth. It was already a bad relationship, but the meth made everything so much worse, because when she would be angry, instead of me being calm and trying to deal with her being upset, I would also be extremely angry, and I wouldn't be able to control it. So she would start throwing blows, and I would just try to be pushing her out of the room, and like it was not good. Like my dad had to physically like escort her out of my house multiple times. She broke down my door one time and left a scar on my face. Like broke it down and it hit my face and left a scar. She tried to kill herself in my bed, almost successfully. She stole my bars, popped 10 of those, walked down to the liquor store, stole some Hennessy, down that, and I come in to my room, and she's just like, didn't look like she was alive, and I started like pushing on her, and like she wasn't breathing, and that was terrifying. I was tripping actually that day. I was on 2CB, and it snapped me out of it real quick. I got sober real quick. I just started to like push on her chest. Like I don't know how to do CPR, but I tried, and I started to give her mouth to mouth, and the mouth to mouth worked somehow. She just started to breathe again, and I was like fucking sobbing. I was just sobbing. I was like, no, you can't die. You cannot die. You cannot die. Like I'm not letting it happen. Whatever, like it's not happening. Like sorry, it's not happening. And like I nursed her back to health. I made her throw everything up. Like, you know what the fucked up part was? It was her dad's birthday, and I was trying to call an ambulance, and she was just begging me like, don't call an ambulance. My dad's birthday. It'll fuck everything up for me. And like I feel like a piece of shit because I didn't call an ambulance. But like at the same time, like I'm thinking I'm trying to help her, but it really wasn't helping her. And of course my family wasn't there for that whole entire thing, so no one was there to stop anything. That was traumatizing. So.
Where are you at today?
Where am I at today?
Yeah, what are you doing? I mean, are you still using?
Yeah. I was actually, it's funny because I keep trying to quit. You know, it's not easy quitting fentanyl, but I kept messing up going on my methadone clinic, and I would like skip a few days, and I'd have to restart the dose or whatever. And in 2 or 3 days, my dose should be back up to what it should be, and I'm gonna try to quit again in like 2 to 3 days. And I
think that's a good place to pause, just because he's talked about, I guess, 3 significant things. First of all, he went to heroin, another opioid, depressant, illicit drug. Then he went to, illicit Adderall, and then to methamphetamine, because they're very similar. So his friends were saying. And then he's talking about methadone. So, I mean, there's a quick rundown. The heroin, you know, it's an opioid, it's a depressant. The methamphetamine is a stimulant. The Adderall salts are also amphetamine salts, amphetamine stimulants, but work in a very different level of potency. Do you know much about methadone and opioid treatment? Do you want to talk to that a bit? Like, why would someone on fentanyl start taking methadone, which is an opioid?
I suppose, so methadone is one of the 2 main opioids that's used as like a opiate substitution type treatment. It's a long half-life, and it's liquid, so it's convenient. People can, you know, take a little bit or a bit more depending on what they need to. And it essentially, because it's long-acting, it kind of covers them and holds them so they don't go into withdrawals. I can imagine for a fentanyl addict, given that it's a really potent opioid and a very short half-life, that the withdrawals would be excruciating. And I would imagine that he was using it, to prevent himself from going into withdrawals. I think in the States, it's harder to get legitimately. It's just not well accepted, perhaps for political reasons. It speaks a bit, I guess, to perhaps some of the differences in philosophy between the two countries, Australia and the States.
Because it is regularly, there are a lot of methadone clinics in Australia.
That's right, yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah, and but presumably it was to tide him over until he could get more fentanyl, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I guess, sorry, yeah, that's where I blanked. I wanted to also say, like, quitting an addiction like a fentanyl addiction is very, very hard to do alone. And that's why you need drug and alcohol supports, depending on what the drug is. There's usually Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, other support services out there. And it's hard to do something alone, and sometimes it requires even more bravery to ask for help and to accept help. So if anyone who's watching this is suffering with an addiction, please, consider reaching out to your local supports.
I really hope this time it works, because the dose should be at the right point. So, but yeah, I am still using fentanyl. I'm not using meth anymore. I quit that a long time ago. Fentanyl is just about the only drug I do, except for Xanax sometimes, because I have pretty bad anxiety, insomnia.
Is there a downside to taking the Adderall?
Oh, yeah. One thing it does is make you very sexually devious. Like, you do things you would never do, and everyone can act like they don't, but it's an open known thing for Adderall and meth that it makes you very, like, you do some pretty messed up shit. You get angry very easily, very, very easily. And you can't, like, stop being angry. Like, you just storm around the house fucking mad. Like, there's lots of downsides to Adderall. I don't think the upsides are worth it. Because I'm going back to college, and I'm not taking Adderall. I'm never going to take that stuff again. It's not worth the risk, in my opinion.
I mean, amongst you.
I think an important point here is, if you think you have ADHD, get a proper assessment done. I'm not sure Jake has had a formal diagnosis, as opposed to self-diagnosing and taking stimulants. And that if you do have ADHD, there are a lot of treatments, both medication and non-medication strategies to improve focus. And if Adderall doesn't work, maybe something else will, if it's what you need. But if stimulants aren't work, there's also non-stimulant,
exactly.
To help with the sleep and insomnia. You can think of some options for him. So
they also help with the concentration and the impulsivity and various other aspects that perhaps the effect size or the benefit that you get from them is not quite as large as it is for stimulants, but everyone's different, and some people tend to get a really good response and doesn't have those downsides that he's mentioning about with the Adderall.
And anyway, we're not diagnosing or de-diagnosing Jake. We're just speculating based on this video that he's very kindly shared and sharing our thoughts.
Here's, like when you were in high school or back in Huntington Beach, are there a lot of kids that are in a similar situation with drugs as you?
Not really, actually, no. I was one of the few in my school. I dropped out like sophomore year. I got my GED, but
it's good to hear.
I didn't really know many people, to be honest. Like, I had a very small group of friends. The worst they did was maybe like Xanax. They didn't get close to what I did. And after high school, everyone I knew kind of started just like drifting away. I had this one really good friend still, and we were like starting a brand together because I'm into fashion. If you couldn't tell, it's one of the few things that I still have during my addiction. And we were doing a brand together, and like I had a few things that I had in this collection I was gonna make, but it was not released yet. And he just went and took everything and released it on his own brand, and like didn't give me credit, didn't ask me anything. So that was the end of that friendship. And that was like the last friend I had, and then I had like no friends. And then my ex was like all I had for a long time. And then after I caught her like doing shit behind my back multiple times, I finally just like, I thought like, if she's not gonna stop and it's not gonna stop hurting me, I have to make the decision to make her stop hurting me. So I did that, and then after that is when I started to really use fentanyl. Right after that breakup, that's the first time that I used fentanyl in a few years. That's how it started, this current addiction, was that breakup. It took the pain away completely, 100% took the pain away. So it was helpful at first for maybe like a month. And then I realized when I don't have it, I go through severe withdrawals. And it was terrifying to realize that because I didn't have it one time and I didn't know how bad it was going to get. And it got so bad. And withdrawals are the worst part about it, I'd say. It's really, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Like, I just had COVID, and that's the sickest I've ever been, and I would prefer that to withdrawals any day, for sure.
What are you afraid of now?
I'm afraid of not being who I feel like I could be. I'm afraid of wasting my potential because I feel like I know I have a lot of potential.
Are there things you like to do with your life?
Yeah, fashion, like I make clothes, photography, like graphic design. And I've been told by many people I'm very good at it. Like, people buy my clothes sometimes. Like, I'm not ashamed, or I'm not like afraid to say, like, I know I'm very good at fashion. But during this addiction, it has kind of taken that away to an extent, though. I'm not really making clothes anymore. I'm just buying them. So that's really something that I want to start again. But at the same time, it's like the only time I was able to do that really like well was when I was on meth. And it's like, I don't want to go back to that just to make clothes. So it's a really weird predicament. Like, it's hard to do anything without a stimulant when you have ADHD. It's just really hard. So.
What's your biggest regret?
That's a really big question. I'd say smoking weed after I got out of jail.
Do you feel like weed's a gateway?
For me, I don't think it's the gateway for everyone, but I think when I do any drugs, it just goes all out. Like, so yeah, I feel like that's, if I really feel like if I chose not to.
Feel free to pause it if you want to interject and make a reflection. We're getting towards the end, and he's raised some really important points, especially around weed as a gateway drug. Did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like we were saying before, that it's one of those things that's just really kind of accepted, and I guess it's part of society now. And for many people, they can probably just pick it up and put it back down again, you know. But I think for someone who kind of identifies and recognizes that he is, I guess, an addict, for people like Jake, it's much harder to put it back down again, and it really does have that kind of disinhibition, or, you know, just takes any self-control that you might have about using and just brings it down a notch, and that can be enough to just really unlock the floodgates, and the whole thing spirals out of control, which is kind of what he quite nicely described. And it's interesting, isn't it, that he's identified that as his single biggest regret. When he was talking about how he stole his grandmother's opioids when she had cancer, you know, and the look on his face, and you could tell he felt pretty bad about doing that, right? Like, but I think he recognizes that possibly he was at a bit of a point in his life where things could have gone in different directions, and unfortunately he seems to recognize that because he started smoking again, that things perhaps went in a poorly direction.
I guess the other reflection I wanted to make is that I'm optimistic for Jake if he has the right supports and help, because he does have a good sense of self-esteem.
I think so. Yeah.
It's going to be hard, but I think he can get there for sure.
Yeah, I think he is, like, something has gone okay for him in his early life, because he does have a sense of who he is as a person, and you can tell that he actually has a sense that he's a good person, you know, trying to get out, I suppose you could say, almost. And he that's what he wants, but yeah.
That would be a really insightful question to ask Jake. Like, who was in your early childhood important people in your life that inspired you?
I suspect it was his grandparents, but of course I don't know.
Yeah.
Start smoking weed, I would be completely cool right now. I think I would have been able to deal with everything in a different way. I think I would have learned how to. I would have worked out at home like I did, and I wouldn't be in the mess I am now. Like, it's just, it's crazy how much money I've spent on this drug. Like, it's the most money I've ever spent in my life, and it just goes to waste just so I can feel normal. Like, I don't get high anymore. I just feel normal. That's what sucks. Like, I don't get any relief. I get relief from feeling super shitty, but I don't feel good ever. So.
Jake, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in your 21 years?
When you have a good thing, don't resort back to your old ways and make a mistake, because you're on this new path and you could do so much. And if you know that something will bring you back to your old ways, you need to stay away from it.
All right, Jake, thank you so much for sharing your story. I wish you lots of luck in your future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. That was really helpful and insightful thing to share. So, Russell, do you have any reflections you wanted to share? Closing comments?
I found it really interesting. So he's described that he likes fashion a lot, and then you saw when it cut to the kind of stand-up shot and it panned down, there was that those statistics of the opioid crisis. Wasn't that fascinating? And it was almost like he was this, like, personification of a contradiction, you know, in that he's here is Jake, and he identifies as a fentanyl addict, but on his genes is this kind of eloquent description of the harms that come from the opioid crisis. It was really interesting.
Yeah, he clearly wants to spread the word and help reduce what he's gone through to kind of break the cycle, which is really inspiring. And it goes to show how powerful addiction is, that you can hate it so much, yet it can still control your life, you know.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining in that reflection, and I hope you guys found that interesting and you learned something. If you have any comments or reflections you want to put, you want to share, just put them in the comments down below. And if you found that useful, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. That's really a really nice way to support us. And other than that, I just wish everyone a beautiful day full of love and connection and good things. And we'll see you all in the next video. All right, bye for now.